Hi everyone, Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, here with another episode of Countdown to the Cup, where I give you the latest news about the 2024 Breeders Cup taking place at Del Mar. Now, before we get into the details, want to make sure to remind you to like and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel. We have a lot of race previews, full card analyses, weekly news videos like this one, and so much more. Big thank you to all the new subscribers we had over the last week. I know a lot of you are probably European racing fans because a lot of you tuned in to watch that preview of the ARC that I had with Matt Chapman. Good news, we're going to have plenty of content getting you ready for the Breeders' Cup and focusing on those European runners coming over. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Now, let's dive into what was a jam-packed week of Breeders' Cup Challenge Series winning your in races for a lot of different divisions. I think the one division in particular we're going to highlight today is the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and those three performances that we saw in those Challenge Series races up here in New York in the Champaign, down at Keeneland in the Breeders Futurity, and out on the West Coast at Santa Anita in the American Pharaoh. We're also going to talk about Thorpedo Anna versus Idiomatic and what is shaping up to be a very fun showdown of an older mare against the dominant 3-year-old filly in that division, and looking ahead at that distaff. And then we'll also give one more look at the Breeders' Cup contenders for the Classic as well. Now, we're going to have a lot more Countdown to the Cup episodes in the coming weeks. We're going to be giving detailed analysis of the different barns, trainers, getting those horses ready in terms of what their historic success rate is, who they're bringing to Del Mar for the Breeders' Cup, and so much more. All right, well, like I said, let's dive into what I think was really the storyline that I think the most amount of people were interested in from the Breeders' Cup winning your in races this weekend, which were the juveniles, because it was still unsettled. There had not been a Challenge Series race for this division until this past weekend, and there are only 3 winning your in races. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot more than just 3 horses in this field, but you'll see the 3 horses that won this week are the 3 that I have listed at the top: Chancer McPatrick in the Champaign, Citizen Bull in the American Pharaoh, and East Avenue in the Breeders' Futurity. And then I have a few other horses that look to be pointed in that direction. Obviously, we're going to have to wait to see in the coming days and weeks whether or not all of these horses are in fact going to try 2 turns, going a mile and a 16th at Del Mar. But I think that a lot of these horses are obviously going to be a part of this field, and how that could potentially impact the way this juvenile field is going to look. In my opinion, the 3 most interesting races this week, or I should say at the Breeders' Cup right now, are the juvenile. I think the distaff, just because of the showdown between Idiomatic and Thorpedo Anna, the Classic because it feels so wide open, and then I think you could look at like the Sprint maybe feels pretty wide open, and obviously the Turf. And with all the European runners as well as a horse like Shahryar coming over, I think that could be a really interesting race, as well as the Breeders' Cup Mile. You have a horse like Carl Spackler, who everybody loves, who is now coming off the 2nd consecutive Grade 1 win. So a lot of big races. But let's talk a little bit about this juvenile field and what we learned this past weekend. And what we learned was that the hype around Chancer McPatrick is real. The question, though, is, will it still be real going 2 turns and a mile and a 16th on a track, Del Mar, that traditionally does not play well to closers? Now, one of the things I will say is one of the things I do at NYRA Bets is I track winning trip analysis by distance and surface. And throughout the summer at Saratoga, almost nobody, less than 10% of winners going sprinting on the dirt, were closing from more than 3 lengths back at the half-mile mark. You know who 2 of those winners were? Chancer McPatrick. He just did it twice, in his maiden and in the Hopeful Stakes. So far at Aqueduct during this Belmont Fall Meet that we're hosting here, nobody is really closing from more than 3 lengths back going a mile on the main track. You know who did? Chancer McPatrick. This is a horse that seems to be overcoming track biases or track trends, however you want to frame that. And I think that's worth noting, because it's not as if he's been running on a closing favoring track. He's been running on tracks that really do not play well to this style, and yet he's been doing it and doing it pretty convincingly. So it was a dominant effort in the Champaign, and I have normally I would just show the replay of the quarter pole maybe to home, but I really want to show you the move he made. In case you missed this Champaign, watch the move he makes around the far turn. And I think before we watched that. I want to preface it by saying he broke well on that far outside post. He broke, I would say, mid-pack, maybe even a little bit forward in the Champagne. So the gate issues that some people I think were worried about really weren't there. And if you go back and watch his maiden victory, he didn't have any gate issues that day either. He broke cleanly from the gate. He just didn't have a really swift turn of foot early on and swift acceleration, but he broke just fine. It was just in the hopeful where he broke in and had some trouble that you saw him get shuffled back as a result. But on the far outside post, he broke effectively, but still, he just doesn't maybe have that desire to get up front. He doesn't maybe have that natural early speed. And throughout the backstretch, he just, Flavien Prat just found himself kind of giving up ground, just kind of falling further and further back. Now, one of the things I made a point of when I previewed this race was there was a lot of speed. So it doesn't surprise me that Chancer and Flavien decided, let's go back a little bit. Let's let some of this speed run itself out up on the front end. But I want to show you this move that he made around the turn, because you just don't see 2-year-olds make this type of a move. You don't see many horses make this type of a move. He's the number 10 horse, green and yellow silks on the outside, and you see him almost all the way in the back, all of a sudden starts making a move, and he just starts picking off horses around the turn and doing it without being asked. I mean, Flavien's not pushing him at all at this point. He's still kind of, letting him get into his stride, letting it out a notch. Now we turn for home, and now, we're getting over the turn, and now we're going to be asked. And again, Flavien just kind of pushing down, gets the crop out, gives him a tap, and this horse really responds. Tip Top Thomas there was the horse on the inside, very well thought of horse, who I thought ran a very good race for second and was your second choice that day. But Chancer just blows by the field and did it pretty easily without being asked. I know I ran into Acacia Clement on the way out of the winner's circle after this race, and she was really impressed by just how good Chancer looked and his ability to make that move around the turn. Now, again, the question is whether or not he's going to be able to do that going 2 turns, whether or not he gets the same pace setup going 2 turns, whether or not the track is going to play to him coming from that far off the pace going 2 turns. There are questions to answer. There are absolutely questions to answer with him, but he's 3 for 3 at this point. I would argue this race has been his most impressive in terms of how easily he won it. If you remember his maiden, he barely got up in time. In the hopeful, he had trouble out of the gate, lost. Flavien actually lost the irons as well. And so they had all sorts of trouble in that race as well. And again, got up in time there, battling Ferocious. And this one, I think, was probably the most impressive performance. Now, Tip Top Thomas, you see, I have him listed here as a probable or possible juvenile entry. I don't think he did anything to dissuade Todd Pletcher from sending him out there. I thought that was a very good race that he ran. They set very reasonable fractions and strong fractions up on the front end. And I think he's a horse that has a very bright future. I do wonder if he has the pedigree for 2 turns, but he didn't really fade late. I mean, it was just more Chancer being stronger late and that stride extending, but a dominant day there with Chancer up here in New York. A good day for McKenzie as a sire, because the race right before this, the Frizette Scottish Lassie, also an offspring of McKenzie, wins that race and is going to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. So really nice first crop for McKenzie there, and Chancer McPatrick, one of his standout progeny already. Now, the next race we saw was the Breeders' Futurity, and East Avenue for Brendan Walsh really lived up to the hype. And this was a horse that when I looked at it on paper, he was lone speed. And I kept going, he looks really good. It's like a Godolphin homebred. I know Kaylee Shapiro, my colleague, really high on this horse. She loved the pedigree. The dam is a half to Cody's Wish. Godolphin homebred. She really liked this just pedigree on this East Avenue. As it got closer to the race, I was a little worried by how weak the maiden race at Ellis Park had come back. But again, pace makes the race. And when you watch the replay of this race for East Avenue, of course he won. So he just got out on the lead and nobody pressed him and was able to kind of click off the fractions he wanted. Now, those were still strong fractions, to be clear. Earned a 95 buyer speed figure. Chancer earned a 92. And you watch here, turning for home, there's nobody within 3 lengths of him, 4 lengths of him. And Tyler Gaffleone's just kind of sitting there on this horse, and he's got plenty of horse under him turning for home. That's Ferocious chasing him in second, and Ferocious was just kind of in chase mode the entire time and really couldn't get into it. But Tyler had this horse wrapped up turning for home, and this one looks impressive. Very good looking horse who the people who were on hand that day at Keeneland even said Tyler had a hard time pulling this horse up after the race. I mean, this was a horse that really wanted to keep going. A lot of pedigree there. Like I said, Medaglia d'Oro up top. Dam is a half to Cody's Wish. Godolphin homebred. Brendan Walsh, Tyler Gaffleone. These are connections I usually find myself rooting for. Brendan in particular. Always like to see the Walsh barn doing good things and getting really live runners. Very impressive effort down there. The question that I think does still need to be answered with East Avenue is what happens when another horse looks him in the eye. There's going to be other speed in this Breeders' Cup Juvenile. You know, you look down the list, a horse like Tip Top Thomas, if he goes, is going to be forward. A horse even like Jonathan's Way, who we'll talk about in a second, is probably going to be pretty forward as well. So there's other horses that are going to press. Citizen Bull for Bob Baffert, who we'll get to in a moment. All of these horses are going to want to be forward. That kind of sets up a little bit more for Chancer, but it's also a question of can East Avenue handle pace pressure early in a race because he hasn't faced it to this point. The maiden at Ellis was a walk in the park, and honestly, so was the Breeders' Futurity. That speaks to the overall talent the horse has to be able to earn the lead in those circumstances, but still, he's going to have to contend with some tougher customers and some tougher early speed than he has to this point. Now, let's talk a little bit about Ferocious and Gustavo Delgado, the trainer, and that performance. It was interesting to see because one of the things that we didn't really harp on too much, but I had mentioned in a couple of articles that I had written for NYRA Bets, was this was the third jockey in 3 starts for Ferocious. Now, that's not an indictment on the horse. Javier Castellano got hurt in a separate riding accident, and who was his normal jockey. Irad Ortiz Jr. took over for the hopeful, but what ends up happening is Irad stays up here in New York, and so the horse goes to Kentucky, and Luis Saez picks up the mount. So now we've had 3 jockeys in 3 starts. That's a little tough, I think, for the horse and for the jockey, to be honest, to not really know the horse that well. So something to keep in mind. If you watch the head-on of the start of that race, he definitely has some trouble, and he's kind of knocked around a little bit on the rail, and he's kind of had to get pulled up at one point and checked a couple times, and he's kind of thrown his head. He did not have the easiest trip. To be fair to him, he did not have the easiest trip, I think, in that Breeders' Futurity. Like I said, he was in chase mode behind Lone Speed really the entire way. So I'm willing to forgive Ferocious for what was a perfectly fine second-place effort. I mean, there was no harm in finishing second here. And Ramiro Restrepo, the owner, even said as much to Ahantes 305 in an interview after the race when he said, listen, this is a horse that won impressively in Saratoga, finished second in the Hopeful and second in the Breeders' Futurity. The sky is not falling. And I think Ramiro also, appropriately pointed out, this horse has bigger goals. This horse is focused on next year already, but obviously is going to be geared towards this Breeders' Cup Juvenile. And if you get Javi back on, or just you get a consistent rider, whether it be Louis or Irad again, probably Louis, out of all of these. But it'll be interesting to see who ends up riding him. But that little bit of consistency, familiarity with the horse, he's got a useful running style, and that he doesn't need to lead. I do think I don't want to say he's post position compromised because I think that's overstating it, but I think that he will benefit from a further outside post where he can kind of naturally kind of fall over into a tracking position. And I think that would be very beneficial for him rather than having to be in tight inside, having to get a pocket trip. That's not always easy, especially when a lot of horses want to try to get to the lead. So I think he might benefit from being a little further outside. I didn't see anything in that effort that would make me think he can't get 2 turns. I know there was some debate, what about the pedigree and Flatter and, the dam and I don't know. And it looks like he should be able to get 2 turns. He comes from a similar family as Next. And so, Next can run for days. So I can kind of see some connections here to see that this horse should be able to get the 2 turns, certainly the mile and 16th. Do I think he can get a mile and a quarter? We won't know that until next year. But I think a mile and a 16th to a mile and an eighth is a reasonable ask for him moving forward. But again, interesting to see that effort. Finally, you had what happened out west, and you had McKenzie Street and Getaway Car, Tim Yaktine and Bob Baffert faced off, and it was the other Bob. Of course, we talk about the other Chad all the time here on the East Coast. The other Bob gets the win in Citizen Bull. And I'll be honest, this one kind of similar to the Breeders Futurity in that Citizen Bull was able to carve out some pretty easy fractions. And you see him turning for home here. Getaway Car, stablemates in chase mode in second. But you can see the fraction at the top of the screen, 112 and 4 to 6 furlongs. That's a reasonable pace out in Santa Anita. I would say that's even, dare we say, a slow pace out at Santa Anita. I think they went 47 and 4 to the half. I mean, those are really modest times. So, Martin Garcia was able to kind of walk the dog up front with Citizen Bull. Getaway Car chased, but was never really able to get there. McKenzie Street for Tim Yaktine finished third. We might see all three of those horses in the Breeders Cup Juvenile. But, certainly a nice effort there with Citizen Bull. Bob Baffert talked about how this one just kind of keeps getting better. He's got a powerful back end. I think he's got big hind legs. He should be able to really appreciate a little bit of extra distance. But again, I think much like East Avenue, what happens when he gets pressured on the front end? What happens when there's other speed that kind of looks him in the eye early? Can he sustain that type of a run with maybe more quality horses chasing after him? I think that's a legitimate question to ask. But certainly one you got to take seriously. You always have to take Bob Baffert in California seriously for these types of races. Now, Jonathan's Way is a horse that I feel like we forgot about, but he was so impressive winning the Iroquois, I thought, as well as the horse Owen Almighty. I thought both of those horses ran really well in that Iroquois. Always a fan of Phil Bauer, who really, I think, has a shot with a very, very nice colt this year in Jonathan's Way. He's had a lot of good fillies, and he talked about the kind of transition into training some of the top 2-year-old colts now. And that's a horse that would seem to have appreciated extra distance, was so impressive in debut up here in Saratoga, went down, handled that field, showed a lot better early speed. If you remember in Saratoga, he kind of broke last or broke towards the back and then just kind of swept past everybody. Then the Iroquois went straight to the front and was able to basically go gate to wire. I like that sort of versatility from a horse to be able to say you can do it a couple of different ways. I think that's one of the criticisms you could have about the three horses we talked about to this point, Chancer, Citizen Bull, and East Avenue. All of them have kind of only done it one way. So do you have an alternative? What happens when things don't go your way? One of my favorite quotes is from Mike Tyson. Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. That's, it happens in horse racing. Everybody looks like a superstar until you blow the brake. Then what happens? And what happens when your plan A is taken? Do you have a plan B? Do you have a plan C? And do you have the talent to overcome that? So I think Jonathan's Way, serious horse. Owen Almighty for Brian Lynch. I know a horse that was very impressive down at Churchill getting ready for that race. Sums to consider. And then the other horse is the other Bob Baffert who won the Del Mar Futurity Gaming, who is a win-win-win progeny, if I'm not mistaken. And that horse, I think, has a bright future as well. So bunch of horses in this juvenile field. Going to be really interesting to see as this field solidifies what ends up taking place. Now let's talk a little bit about the Breeders' Cup Distaff. This is the opposite of a full field and is a relatively short field. And there might be a couple of more horses that get added to this. But really, in my opinion, it's a 3-horse race and probably a 2-horse race between Idiomatic and Thorpedo Anna. I also think Awesome Result from Japan is one of the top Japanese horses that's coming over. This is a horse that is undefeated in 7 career starts, coming off a win in their Grade 1 Breeders' Gold Cup. And I think is a really, really talented runner and is already being kind of in some early betting lines installed as the 4th choice at 8-1. Thorpedo Anna, Idiomatic kind of challenging for favoritism. But it's a question of, can Thorpedo Anna be the first 3-year-old, I believe, since Monomoy Girl in 2018. You'd have to double check me, but I did look at this before we got started. I'm pretty sure Monomoy Girl is the last 3-year-old in 2018 when she won to win it as a 3-year-old and win that distaff. I was not overly impressed by Raging Sea in the Beldame up here in New York. I think that horse needs a pace setup like she got in the Personal Ensign, where Randomized and Idiomatic went just way too fast up front. I don't necessarily see that taking place in a relatively short field. So Raging Sea is not a horse I'm that interested in that type of a race. The Argentinian horse, Che Evasora, is now in the Phil D'Amato barn. This one is probably going to won a Breeders' Cup Challenge Series race way back in May and is going to be running, I think, a pretty big long shot in this particular spot. But it's going to be interesting to see who else, if anyone else joins. But the big story this weekend was Randomized kind of getting back to doing Idiomatic, getting back to doing idiomatic things in the Spinster down at Keeneland. And coming for home, I thought this was interesting. Florent Giroux put her up on the lead. She's the 1-5 favorite. Candied makes a little bit of a run at her right here. And you go, okay, that could be interesting. And then Giroux really kind of goes to the crop with her. And the class just starts to show. And you just start to see, and Occult starts to make a little bit of a run late. But you just see she's a massive, massive mare. And when that stride gets unfurled, forget about it. And she just puts away the field to win the Spinster now back-to-back years. Incredibly impressive horse. The biggest concern I have with Idiomatic, with all due respect, is Florent Giroux, who, I'll be honest, 3 of the last 4 races, I've not been a fan of the ride he's given. What he did in the Molly Pitcher, the only reason that horse won was just because she had more class. And Irad Ortiz Jr. got the jump on him that day, and he was completely asleep at the wheel, walking the dog up front, trying to go 50 to the half. Made no sense at all when you have a horse like Idiomatic. As you can tell from that highlight, she's not a push-button horse, okay? It's not like Giroux goes to the crop and then she just spurts off. She takes a while to get that stride of hers into full length, and it takes a minute. And so when all of a sudden she got pressed unexpectedly, suddenly it turned into a sprint race, and that's not really her style. But like I said, the reason she won that Molly Pitcher is just because she's a better animal, quite frankly, than everybody else in that race. And so that wasn't great. I didn't love – I know my colleague and friend Sarah Elbadwi really didn't mind, I guess, the ride that Giroux gave in the personal ensign. I wish the tactics had been different. I wish he had done what Flavian Pratt had done on Highland Falls with Arthur's Ride with regards to what Idiomatic did to Randomized. I make Randomized feel Idiomatic. You don't need to go eyeball to eyeball the entire backstretch, the entire way around, and wear both horses out. Now, yes, you proved Randomized is a little bit of a fraud going 2 turns when she can't get an easy lead. But you also won the battle and lost the war by losing to Raging Sea, who came charging up the end and took advantage of those strong fractions. So I wasn't a fan of that race. Going back earlier this year, the first race back, he rode her 3 wide, 4 wide around both turns like he thought he couldn't lose the race, and then he lost the race. So, I always have some questions. It's easy to second guess. It's easy to be an armchair, jockey sometimes until you're out there and you see the dynamics. But I've just not been a huge fan. That said, I absolutely loved the ride that Giroux gave her in the Breeders Futurity, or in the Spinster, I should say. That was perfect because he got her out up front. And you know what he did? He didn't try to crawl up front. They went 47 and change to the half. They went 111 flat to the 6 furlongs. They set legitimate fractions. And then when it was time to put everybody away, she still had plenty in the tank to put everybody away. And that's the way he's got to ride her, I think. Be aggressive. Get out there. Don't try to turn this into a New York turf race where you're going 25 and 50 to the quarter and a half. Get out there and go with this horse. She's a big lumbering horse, has a huge stride, should love all the distance. So let her lean into that. So I just think if he gives her the right sort of ride, she's going to be really tough to beat. Thorpedo Anna is going to have to probably sit second, I think, if she wants to have any chance at the top of the stretch. Brian Hernandez Jr. will need to be aggressive, getting her out of the gate and kind of chasing Idiomatic, but making sure that you're not having too much to overcome at the end, because you see what happens when you do have a little too much to overcome. She's able to just kind of kick into another gear. So Anna is a filly that I think some people were a little disappointed by that effort in the cotillion. I was not. I was there that day. I can tell you 2 things. One, if she was ever going to lose a race this year to her own sex, it was that race. Okay. Coming off a huge effort in the Travers against Fierceness, nearly beating that horse and nearly winning that race. And you figured coming back on a month's rest, there might be a bounce. there were some questions there. And then she got a tough trip, trapped inside, boxed in, really couldn't get comfortable the whole way, finally got out and was still able to win and never felt the crop in the process. So I think that it is telling that she's able to win even when things don't go her way. Like I said, I didn't view that as a negative at all. So very high on her. But this is one of those races, short field, but man, I can't wait to see Idiomatic and Thorpedo Anna face off against each other. And then, like I said, awesome result. I think as a Philly, or as a mare, I should say, or I guess she is still Philly, who I think got a real shot in this race. I think awesome result is a very, very, very good horse. Of course, we saw Marche Lorraine win at Del Mar just a few years ago and collect Japan's first ever Breeders' Cup win. So can a horse like Awesome Result do it again in this same division? 7 for 7, never lost. Pretty impressive. I don't care what level of competition you're running against. And she's running against the best over there, and she's putting them away and winning. So a horse that I'm very high on with Awesome Result, but going to be a really fun race in this distaff. Now let's just do a final check through of where we stand with the Breeders' Cup Classic contenders. And this hasn't obviously changed too much. It'll be interesting to see as some of these horses ship out to Del Mar, start looking at some of those early workouts that you might start seeing from them. But I think the big story from this group is that there is a chance that the two favorites are going to be 3-year-old international horses. And that's kind of wild. That your favorite and your second choice could very well be Forever Young from Japan and City of Troy coming over and trying dirt for the first time for Aiden O'Brien. Because I'll be honest, there's not a lot of betting interest, in my opinion, for some of the older horses. I think a horse like Tapatrice is a really nice horse, but it's going to be a little bit more of a price. Subsanador for Richard Mandela, I thought was very impressive in the California Crown. A horse I like quite a bit. Highland Falls, a horse I really like in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. I've always been a big fan of that horse. Always knew that horse had a big race in him, and he finally paid me off that last time out. And, fierceness, can he get the mile and a quarter? I think that's a legitimate question to ask, especially in a big field with maybe some other horses. Arthur's Ride, was he a little bit exposed in that Jockey Club Gold Cup as being maybe a little bit of a horse that needs an easy lead or a lone lead and isn't probably going to get it here? You have some other horses like a Fierceness who wants to be up front in this race. So going to be interesting to see. Sierra Leone, could this be the race where Sierra Leone finally gets, breaks through and shows off that huge talent? But it is interesting that there's so much interest, betting interest, and I would say fan interest in two international 3-year-olds. And I'm all for it. One of my favorite Breeders' Cup memories is obviously Tisnow winning it for America in 2001. And one of the great things about that race is who all is in it. Because you hear Tom Durkin talk about Galileo and Saki, the ARC winner and the European super horse Galileo. Those two horses were in that race, trying the dirt. And I love that about the competition of this race, that you are getting the best horses in the world to run this race. It might not be their preferred surface in the case of City of Troy, but geez, could be really impressive, could be really fun. So going to be interesting, and love to hear where you are going in this classic and where you maybe see some value potentially in trying to beat these two international 3-year-olds who might very well be your top two choices in this race. All right, friends. Well, that's going to do it for me this week on Countdown to the Cup. Like I said, make sure to tune back for all of our additional coverage that we have here on NYRA Bets YouTube. Make sure to like and subscribe. Subscribing is completely free of charge. All you do is end up getting more notifications when our videos drop. So, like I said, make sure to press that like button and subscribe today. We're going to have plenty of race previews coming up this week, full card analyses. You might even see a video with my dad. That's right. I'm going back home to South Carolina. Say hi to my dad. We're celebrating my stepmom's anniversary coming here to the United States. It's been 40 years since she escaped from Romania. So we're celebrating that as a family. Going to be a lot of fun. But when going down there, got to have some conversations with my dad, who introduced me to this sport. Might even have a little Baby Yoda doll in the video as well. That's his favorite horse. He loves Baby Yoda. So listen, until next time, friends, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you that it's now post time.